Islamic microfinance is becoming an increasingly popular mechanism for poverty alleviation, especially for developing countries around the world. This microfinance service adheres to the principles of Islam as a form of social responsibility. Yona Islamic Microfinance is the Islamic microfinance of choice in the Gambia, trustworthy and reliable. At Yona Islamic Microfinance, we provide savings products, current accounts, financing products in conformity with Islam. In addition, Yona Islamic Microfinance also offers local and international remittances, takaful fund, management of zakat, management of awqaf, trading and investment, and building of strategic partnerships to bring financial services to the doorstep of the poor with donor projects, madrasas, youth organizations, women groups, and farmer organizations. Make a choice with Yona Islamic Microfinance today. For more information on Yona Islamic Microfinance, call 377-2151 or 9832-151 or visit Yona head office at Tipa Garage, Bakote, or visit any Yona branch located countrywide near you.
Sangdeng Foundation was founded in April 14, 2017, 1 year after the fateful day of April 16, 2016, which was the last day as a family we saw our father. And for this country, it was a day which actually saw the start of the end of a dictatorship, a very brutal dictatorship that has gripped this country for 22 years. And that year, we saw the end of that dictatorship through continuous agitation and outright actions in the streets of Serekunda and Banjul. I mean, all through 8 months until the elections happened that year. So it is in this vein that the Solo Sangdeng Foundation was founded, I mean, after 1 year of the death and disappearance of our beloved father, Mr. Solo Sangdeng. And our foundation really is a very multi-focused institution that aims to, I mean, propagate and continue the legacies of the late Mr. Solo Sangdeng, who was a very remarkable figure, both socially and politically, and has involved in a lot of social work and voluntary work, you know, in all of his lifetime. So, I mean, the Solo Sangdeng Foundation aims to propagate these legacies and continue, I mean, advocacy and voluntary work in all of these areas. So today we commemorate 6 years after the peaceful protest and the disappearance of Mr. Solo Sangdeng, and the torture and maiming of all of his colleagues, some continue to live with great ailments until today. I mean, life-changing. That was a life-changing encounter for a lot of them. So this foundation seeks to propagate Solo Sangdeng's legacies by continuous advocacy and service to mankind, and especially the Gambian people in the areas of education. And we also hope to propagate his legacies through the agitation or the advocacy, and also, you know, in sort of electoral reforms, which was really one of the things that, the main thing that was the cause of his arrest and detention and subsequent death. And so this foundation has been active in the transitional justice process in this country since 2017, in areas like sensitization, obviously, and also advocating for the welfare of many of these victims that were part and victimized as a result of the event of April 14 and other subsequent events that followed. And so for that reason, the Solo Sangdeng Foundation has been active in the transitional justice process, and one of our recent activities was the Reparations Program, which I'd like to highlight to say was one of our most recent programs where we, in partnership with our fellow CSOs in the country, tried to sensitize and sensitize victims and basically the whole population around the issues of reparations in the transitional justice, the TRRC process. This intervention saw, members of our foundation and other partners going around the whole country to really sensitize people on some of the transitional justice issues, especially on reparations on the TRRC. We did not only stop there, we have always participated in all of the all activities in the transitional justice process. And today, we call this meeting with stakeholders from various institutions, government institutions, and obviously civil society organizations as well, to start a discussion around how do we implement TRRC recommendations on security sector reforms as a way and a recipe to serve the ideals of a better society by really implementing some of these recommendations that are in the TRRC report. Without doing much, I will just like to stop there and actually invite Mr. Emmanuel Daniel Diouf, NHRC Chair, to do the opening statements. Thank you.
The late Solo Sangdeng, whose life was brutally cut short by a dictator for merely exercising his fundamental rights and freedom, a fundamental right that is entrenched in our own 1997 Constitution. The theme of this commemoration is implementing the TRRC recommendations, a recipe to discouraging police brutality. Ladies and gentlemen, the late Solo Sangdeng, we've had the introductory statement from the late Solo Sangdeng's son, was a father, a husband, an uncle, a brother, and at the time he was also the national organizing secretary of the United Democratic Party. And he died in detention shortly after his arrest for participating in a peaceful protest. Mr. Solo Sangdeng, the late Solo Sangdeng, it was on a Thursday afternoon. Incidentally, today is also Thursday, 14th April 2016, when he embarked on a peaceful demonstration in Serekunda with some of his colleagues holding placards and banners requesting for electoral reforms. He and his fellow demonstrators had no weapons on them, nor was the demonstration a violent protest. The protest was dispersed by police who arrested several people, including the late Solo Sangdeng and other UDP supporters. The information from Amnesty International at the time is that those arrested were taken to Mile 2 prisons and later to the National Intelligence Agency for interrogation. Although the death of Mr. Sangdeng is currently sub judice under judicial consideration because of ongoing prosecution in the High Court, and therefore restrictions are made about its public discussion. It is, however, a fair assumption, based on Amnesty International and eyewitness reports, that Mr. Solo Sangdeng died a violent and brutal death as a result of him exercising his right to freedom of association, his right to freedom of assembly, his right to freedom of expression, his right to belong to a political party of his choice, and his right to demonstrate against what he perceived were unjust laws. Ladies and gentlemen, freedom of expression, association, assembly, and the right to demonstrate are all fundamental rights and freedoms which are guaranteed in our Constitution and under international and regional human rights treaties and conventions that the Republic of the Gambia ratified over the years. Sadly, the Gambia for over 2 decades was under dictatorship that turned law and order institutions like the feared NIA at the time, the police services, especially the PIU unit, the prison services, the immigration services, and even the customs into accomplices of all the heinous crimes that was directed and committed by the then regime against Gambians. The key rule of law institutions, as a matter of fact, the judiciary, which is supposed to be the chief guardian of the rule of law in any democratic and free country, has its powers usurped and commandeered through the use of threats, coercion, and the appointment of mercenary judges, and with the assistance and connivance, unfortunately, of some of our own legal profession members, and thus rendering the judiciary an appendage of the rogue regime at the time. The decisions of the judiciary was also directed and dictated to by the beck and call of ex-President Jammeh, especially when he had an interest in a matter. The Gambia at the time was in effect a police state, and people were arrested in the dead of night, tortured, detained, and even killed. The general arrogance and attitude towards ordinary Gambians by security personnel, namely the military, the police, especially the PIU, could be felt throughout the country at the time. Ladies and gentlemen, the TRRC ended its public hearing in May 2021, following 3 years of public sittings, and it examined 193 witness testimonies. And as per the Act, it submitted its report to His Excellency the President, Adama Barrow, on the 25th of November 2021, which contained 427 findings and 218 recommendations. On the 24th of December 2021, 1 month after the report was handed to the government, through the Ministry of Justice, held a press conference where the TRRC report was officially launched, and electronic copies were distributed to the public on its website, and also hard copies given to some institutions. In May of this year, which would be 6 months following the date of submission of the report to the President, the government is expected to issue a white paper containing its proposed plan on the implementation of the Commission's report. For those of you who had a chance to peruse through the report itself, you will discover that it touched on various aspects of human rights violations, with recommendations on criminal liability of human rights violation and abuses, issues on reparation, reconciliation, and most importantly, institutional reforms. It also talked about amnesty, memorialization, and the role of the National Human Rights Commission in monitoring of the recommendations. All this is geared to get to the bottom of what happened in the past and to make sure that through appropriate strategies, never again will we allow it to happen in this country, what has happened. If one looks at the volumes of the TRRC, especially volume 8, 13, 14, and 15, relating to institutional hearings, one will find revelations about the role that security personnel played in the human rights abuses. Indeed, reading and watching the testimonies, one quickly realizes that torture and inhumane treatment and punishment and even death was meted out to those who were perceived as enemies of the system, of the state, and of the then President Yahya Jammeh. The TRRC has therefore come up with a myriad of recommendations to make sure that never again should we go down that path, and therefore it proposed reforms and recommendations for our security personnel. Incidentally, security sector reform was part of the package of the Transitional Justice Arrangement and Process, which was envisaged in 2017. Unfortunately, the security sector reform is perceived by many as ineffective and on a snail pace. Moreover, there is great concern about the police heavy-handedness and the excessive use of force on the public, as evidenced in recent video footages and from individual complaints made to the National Human Rights Commission of the Gambia by members of the public. Although there have been capacity building initiatives for the police and the prison services through the assistance of development partners and also the National Human Rights Commission, and some of these training were geared towards mainstreaming human rights in the work of the police. The National Human Rights Commission had assisted the police to even come up with a code of conduct in the way it does its work. Having said that, there is much that needs to be done for us to attain the never again mantra of the TRRC. Ladies and gentlemen, no one is underestimating the importance and role of a police service in a country in view of their crucial mandate and functions as provided for in section 178 of the 1997 Constitution of the Gambia and section 4 of the Police Act. The police are authorized by law to protect life and property, apprehend offenders, investigate crimes, and prosecute crimes which are summary in nature, and generally to maintain law and order in society. I think we all know and we all appreciate that without an effective and efficient police force, we risk a breakdown in law and order and a society and country where anarchy will reign. That said, however, the police are supposed to carry out their duties in accordance with law and due process. And in the very rare instances where force has to be used, it has to be reasonable, proportionate, and measured. And as always, maximum restraint must always be exercised. The TRRC report contains key recommendations directed at security personnel, including but not limited to more stringent recruitment and screening processes for the security and prison service personnel. Mandatory courses for all security personnel, especially soldiers and the police, on human rights and their role in a democratic society. I will just want to quickly address something which is of great importance, and especially also in the context in which we are talking. That is, in the case of policing public assemblies and rallies relating to the police, there are set guidelines that have been made and recommended by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights and the UN, which today are the guiding principles that must be adhered to by the police. And the National Human Rights Commission has taken the police on it to make sure that they adhere to these guidelines. And regarding policing assemblies generally, peaceful assemblies should be facilitated wherever possible, and the enforced dispersal of public assemblies should only take place as a measure of last resort when violence occurs or when there is an imminent threat of violence. The policing of assemblies, of public assemblies, is a particular activity that requires different skills and abilities from routine policing. In particular, it requires the balancing of competing interests and rights, and it is therefore important that police officers are well trained in both human rights and crowd management principles. The use of force by the police should always be regulated by domestic law. The use of force at an assembly should be proportionate and kept to the minimum level necessary. Any use of force should comply with international standards, including the United Nations Basic Principles on the use of force and firearms by law enforcement officials. The African Commission, in Resolution 281, urged states, and Gambia is a member state, to refrain from arbitrary arresting and detaining demonstrators, as well as from the disproportionate use of force against demonstrators. The use of force should be restricted to exceptional instances and be strictly carried out in accordance with international human rights law. In particular, the use of force should satisfy the principles of necessity and proportionality. The right to assemble and to demonstrate, ladies and gentlemen, is an integral to democracy and human rights. Even if acts of violence occur during such events, participants retain their rights to bodily integrity and other rights, and force may not be used except in accordance with the principles of necessity and proportionality, and firearms may never be used simply to disperse an assembly. The other principles that has been set out by the UN and the African Commission is that a police presence needs to be proportionate to the situation. So, for example, the police might be deployed in larger numbers than appear necessary to be deployed, wearing protective clothing or riot gear, and it should not be in a manner that appears confrontational, to serve or to intimidate the protesters. Number 10, good practices suggest that a process of dialogue and negotiation should be used to deal with any problems at assemblies, and that the police should maintain contact with the assembly organizers throughout the event to ensure that emerging problems or difficulties are dealt with swiftly before they can become serious and require aggressive intervention. Ladies and gentlemen, states must adopt and implement rules and regulations on the use of force by their officials. The legal and administrative framework must regulate all circumstances surrounding and relating to the use of force as to who, when, and how. We all agree that we are coming from an era where human rights was systematically abused by our security personnel. We cannot regress to what was, and it therefore behoves on all of us, that is the duty bearers, the executive, the police, to respect, protect, and fulfill the rights of anyone living within the jurisdiction. And for the right holders, that is us, ordinary citizens, people in the Gambia, that we should, as right holders, also understand that we too have responsibilities to keep the peace and to be law-abiding, and when aggrieved, to also resort to the courts and other institutions to redress our grievances and not take the law into our own hands. We are in it together. We should all create a better society. And ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Sangdeng Foundation, I thank you all.
Stakeholder convergence and, of course, conversation on security sector reforms, which we deem very necessary and important that we hold this conversation, start a conversation, start talking and seeing what to do about the security sector and security sector reforms. And thanks to the institutions that are here today. I am supposed to honor the victims and survivors of April 14, 2016. I would like to start off by saying that April 14, 2016 was not a particular person's day. It was a Gambian day. It was was a day that selfless Gambians gave up their lives. Possibly they knew they were not going to go home, but they gave it up for Gambia, and Gambians would see that day as such. A person can be affiliated to a party or to a group, like we all have families, but the most important thing for April 16 is that it was to liberate Gambia, and it was done for Gambia. I would like to highlight that so it is seen that way. So I'll just come on with my little speech that I put together. Even though my emotions are all over the place, I have realized that today is not a day to cry. Rather, it is a day to show gratitude to the few who sacrificed all for our motherland, the Gambia. 6 years ago today, when not many imagined that a person could stand up to Yaya Jammeh in the streets with a bullhorn and a banner saying, "Enough, Gambia deserves better," these few fearless men and women did so. We need proper electoral reforms, they wrote and chanted. Many looked at them and concluded as they marched the streets of Serekunda towards Westfield, these people have a dead wish. These people have a death wish. But did they? Yes, they had a wish, but surely it was not to die, but to free Gambia from the claws of dictatorship. However, there was a man who was ready to give it all, a man who was ready to stand alone even if everyone else was to leave. In his own words, and I quote, "If I have to be the sacrificial lamb for Gambia to be free, then so be it. Ibrahim Sangdeng, you promised and delivered. Now it is Gambia's turn to deliver. I know you did not sacrifice yourself for gains, not for recognition. You stood your ground, endured the painful torture meted out to you on that fateful day, took all the blame and said, 'Kill me if you have to,' and that they did. This undoubtedly will remain the worst day of my life, our lives. I still imagine how much pain they must have inflicted on my strong man who barely says, 'I am sick' or 'tired.' I cannot know how it felt exactly, but I feel how it felt even today. I wish I could have taken a cane, making it one less for you. Thank you, Ba. Thank you, Falan Sonko, Nogo Njai, Fatou Kamara, Ibrahima Janko Sise, Lang Marong, Kafu Bayo, Modungom, and all the April 14th victims and survivors. Gambia owes you. Thank you.
When Solo Sangdeng fell, our democracy began to rise at the same time. So it's an honor for me to be here representing the Ministry of Justice in this very important occasion. The chairman has discussed extensively on the findings of the TRRC. Obviously, the TRRC was set up to investigate the events ranging from 1994 to 2017 and to establish a historical record of all the atrocities that were meted out on Gambians by the regime of former President Jammeh. Before the TRRC even began, security sector reform was high on the agenda because we all realized that when you look at the history of Gambia between 1994 and 2017, the security services were intricately involved in most of the atrocities that were committed, at the behest of former President Jammeh, very likely given his own background as a military man. The TRRC obviously dug very deep into the issues of the security services and the involvement in the happenings over those years, and made a number of recommendations which they believe will help in resolving the issue and taking Gambia away from that very dark history. But in addition to the recommendations made by the TRRC, there are also initiatives that have been taken up by the government to ensure that while the TRRC recommendations may not be comprehensive, the government also needs to take a step to address some of the issues we have with the security sector. One of the most important things that we have to realize when we're looking at security sector reform, especially violence, is not just targeting the security sector, but also looking at a national culture of violence. Because our security men are not aliens. They didn't come from Guinea or Mali. They came from amongst us. They are brothers. When they take off the uniforms at night, they are your husbands. They are our wives, they're our daughters and our mothers. So if we address the issue of violence in the country as a whole, and how do we constructively channel our grievances, then it's undoubted that that will trickle down to our security forces. There's no doubt that that will trickle down to our security forces. One of the key things that the TRRC recommended was training. Over the past 20-something years, training was very low on the agenda for the security sector because obviously we suffered from what we can call sort of a executive capture of the security services, who acted not necessarily, and it's always good to point out that it was not the entire security sector that carried out all these atrocities, but then, as you all know, a single bean is sufficient to make the entire spoon of beans bitter. So that's the effect we have. Training is one of the things that has been recommended. You know, we have very, very good structures for training for the security sector. That's international humanitarian law. We have the Geneva Convention on Armed Conflict, which, you know, dictates how soldiers should behave in a situation of conflict. Because although you're in war or you're in conflict, it's important to respect certain rules of conflict. And these came out mainly due to certain isolated events of conflict, like the November 11th attacks and security sector response to attempted coup d'etats. But if you look at it, most of the issues that happened didn't happen in the context of conflict. It happened in day-to-day life. It was civilians going about their normal business. It wasn't a conflict situation. So the TRRC recommended that human rights approach should be made central to training for security sector members. Now, when you talk about the security sector, we have the army, we have the police, we have the prisons, we have the fire service, we have the intelligence agencies. Sometimes we ignore that the security service is broader than just the police and the army. Take, for example, April 10th and April 11th, which is something we celebrated this week. It all started as a result of alleged attacks by the fire service personnel. That was not the army, that was not the police. So we need to recognize that the security sector is broad as well. This year, in the run-up to the elections, with partners such as UNDP, the NHRC, and other stakeholders, trainings were carried out for the security sector in proper crowd response and also in human rights. We believe that if we normalize human rights trainings for security personnel, then they learn that there are different approaches to conflict, there are different approaches to diffusing conflict, different approaches to engaging with the communities in the job they do. One other key area is in terms of proper hiring and proper promotion processes. One thing we saw between 94 and 2017 is meteoric rises. People jumping from sergeants to generals, from lieutenants to generals, without the proper training. If you look at the army, or if you talk to security personnel, you know that there are different types of training for different types of members of the armed forces. Because for regimented forces, you have enlisted soldiers and you have officers. And they have different responsibilities because officers are commanders. And no matter where you go, be it the US or the UK, soldiers, that's enlisted soldiers, are trained to obey commands. They don't have, you know, in-depth and elaborate training in the art of war, the Geneva Convention, international humanitarian law. They're simply trained to follow orders. So what happens when you take a person who's trained to follow orders without questioning and without proper officer training, you put them as commanders? Obviously, it breeds chaos. So that was a very, very key recommendation by the TRRC to implement proper hiring procedures and proper promotion procedures. Even before the TRRC made this recommendation, it was an issue that was flagged, and work had commenced on the vetting bill. The vetting bill was a bill that was developed through the Office of the National Security Advisor and with assistance from international partners such as DCAF, where we're working on a vetting bill. A vetting bill will lay out proper procedures to vet those going into the army, make sure that they meet certain minimum standards, make sure that their promotion is catered for, make sure that their background checks so that we get the best in the army. We've seen instances, and I think it's been a widespread practice, where people have joined the army with fake documents and even risen to, the highest ranks of the army. So the vetting bill is going to address all those issues and ensure that we have proper procedures for hiring into the army and for promotion into the army. I think when we talk about beyond training and beyond vetting, one of the most important issues, I think, is restoring trust. Restoring trust. There is a serious lack of trust between the public and the security services. And interestingly, sometimes there's a lack of trust between the security services themselves and the public. Obviously, that rises from how we conduct ourselves during protests. Because obviously, if you exist for 25 years without a proper channel or proper way to channel your grievance, there's only one way, and which is violence in channeling your grievance. And so there's a need for us to actually work actively, and this is something which the government cannot do alone. We need to work with CSOs, we need to work with the public. How do we restore trust between the security sector and the public? And I think we can do it both. We can do it two ways. One is by bridging the gap between the army and the public, by bringing the army and the security service close to the public, so that we recognize that we all are on the same team and we all have the same agenda, which is working in the interest of the country. But also, another way we can restore trust is by actually earning the trust of the public by carrying out our duties in accordance with the Constitution and in accordance with rule of law. In America, they say protect and serve. Protect and serve. So the security services are are servants of the public, protect and serve the public. So our belief is, once we are done with all these reforms and the army is now carrying out the role it's meant to carry under the Constitution, then it flows naturally that public trust in the army will be restored without much being done. Additionally, there's a need for reconciliation. There's a serious need for reconciliation because security personnel will continue to work and live amongst us. We have neighbors, we have colleagues who are all members of the security, but then we need to balance reconciliation with accountability because we all know, we talk about maslaha and other things. One of the key reasons why there's a culture of nonchalance or a culture of impunity, it will always thrive if there's a lack of accountability. Accountability curbs reoccurrence. So one of those recommendations is reconciliation, but balancing reconciliation with the need for perpetrators to be held accountable. It's like what do they say? Once bitten, twice shy. So once you see perpetrators being held accountable, it acts as a deterrent for further occurrence of violence or other acts against the public. We also need to recognize, as I said at the beginning, that the security sector reform has to be a wholesome approach. It cannot be done in isolation. A security sector reform has to go hand in hand with reforms across the board, be it economic reform, be it social reform, be it cultural reform. Because if you do a security sector reform isolated, while ignoring other very important aspects that might affect security sector reform, then it will be something which we're doing in vain. We just have to look at security officials as victims as well. We saw the witch hunting exercises where the witch hunters were taken to certain police stations or to the military barracks and picked out security officers who were also victims of this witch hunt. We also saw female security personnel who were victims of SGBV. We saw allegations of a particular female soldier allegedly raped 70 times by her superior. So those are issues where we need to approach it from a wholesome perspective. Security sector reform is not solely a government agenda. And if we approach security sector reform from a government perspective, then we might not be successful. Security sector reform is a cross-cutting, multi-sectoral issue. We need to approach security sector reform together with partners. And it's as a result of that in the implementation of the TRRC recommendations, we've taken a consultative and coordinated approach. consultative approach one is engaging stakeholders, that is the public institutions like the National Human Rights Commission, engaging the victim-led organizations, engaging the CSOs for their views on these proposals. Because it's one thing for the TRRC to propose and for the government to implement, but then you realize that the people who are out there in the public interacting with the victims and interacting with the public have very good ideas about how we can go about security sector reform. So it is very important, and I think going forward, as you've seen over the past 2 weeks with the launch of the Ministry of Justice CSO coordination platform, and also the Ministry of Justice and the victim-led organization town hall, all along this process, it will be consultative, where we get feedback from the public and from all the stakeholders in application of these reforms. Another thing is coordination. There's a need for effective coordination, because if we continue to implement in silos and then we don't take into account the views of other major stakeholders in this process, and then we risk having the process jeopardized. But it suffices to say that the security sector reform is ongoing. But as the chairman rightfully mentioned, there might have been certain setbacks, and the snail pace, as the chairman said, the snail pace. But there have also been a lot of challenges along the line in terms of security sector. One is balancing the need for speedy reforms with the need to ensure and preserve national security. That has been a major challenge. And also the sensitivities when you look at the structures of the army, the sensitivities of sweeping reforms, which might have a tendency of jeopardizing security through, not to reveal certain sensitive security matters, but security sector reform is best addressed when it is done from a comprehensive and as a gradual process. Obviously, that process of security sector reform was happening parallel to the TRRC process. So there was a need to also see the TRRC process off, so that the recommendations from the TRRC process could be brought on board and put as one unified process. But the good thing with the security sector reform is it's being chaired by the Ministry of Justice, which is not usual. Usually you see security sector reform being chaired either by Ministry of Defense or Ministry of Interior. But then the government thought it was important to get somebody who is outside the security services and who also comes with a background of rule of law and a background of respect for human rights. So the ministry remains ever committed to security sector reform, and I think it has borne fruit by all the trainings we've seen that are happening for the security services. We've seen the vetting and the clearing of the roles of the military, for example, of all impostors in the army, and also just the whole issue of accountability. We've seen a number of prosecutions. We've also seen, for example, recent moves to try to initiate criminal proceedings against certain members of the security services who were crucial in those atrocities that were committed. It's something we are committed to doing, and we are currently working on the white paper. The white paper, according to Section 19 of the TRRC Act, will lay out government's plan of implementation. The process is a consultative process. We have planned a national discussion on the TRRC recommendations and findings, which will hold from the 25th to the 28th of this month at the International Conference Center, and we'll have participants from all over the country and from out of the country. That's been organized, thankfully, with the support and participation of the National Human Rights Commission, and with support from our partners like the American Bar Association and the ICTJ, International Center for Transitional Justice. We are also planning a nationwide tour. The minister himself will be going on a nationwide tour, because the feedback we got from a lot of our partners, I think Will is here, Wave is here, Anneke is here. The feedback is the people at the grassroots need to hear from government. I know the CSOs have been doing a lot, going into the communities and talking, but the CSOs are just that, CSOs. The people at the grassroots need to hear from government, and in response, the Attorney General himself will be leading this national tour at the first week of May, and will be going around the country, especially hotspots, for example, Sinted and other areas where we had the witch hunt exercises and where we had the hotspots for a lot of the atrocities that occurred. So that will be happening. We've also sent out a call for position papers, and we're trying to get diverse feedback from members of the public. Interestingly, so far, the feedback we've received is from individuals. It's from just regular citizens. We haven't received feedback from organizations yet, but that is positive in the sense that we show that people are taking an interest. So the feedback from all of this will go into the process of elaborating a white paper which takes into consideration the views of everybody. So if we do this, and if we believe that the recommendations of the TRRC on security sector reform are strong and bode well for, and with the proper implementation will change the face of the security sector, and we consult and we bring on board all those views, then I have no doubt that things will change. But before I conclude, I just have to state that we could have perfect recommendations, we could have a perfect plan, but it's all about the execution. Without the execution, the best plan could go to waste. So even in the implementation phase, we're also taking a consultative and an inclusive approach, but having everybody on board in the planning and the implementation of these recommendations. We are also lucky that I think the TRRC has recommended that the NHRC should monitor and report to the National Assembly. So, I mean, if that recommendation is taken on board, the NHRC as a neutral player, obviously, will be able to hold the government accountable and say, this is what you promised to do. Have you done it? And under that recommendation, the NHRC reports to the National Assembly. So we think if all of these different structures are put in place, it bodes well for security sector reform, and we will see the Gambia we want. And the mantra never again will not just be a mantra, but will be a reality. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Honorable Minister of Interior and his able permanent secretary, may I once again thank all the participants for participating in this forum. Security sector reform is a very important program for the government of the Gambia. Since this is something that will shape our institutions, that will shape our behaviors, that will shape our activities and programs to impact development in this country. So, for that being the reason, we must all understand the importance of SSR in the Gambia. The ministry's roles and responsibilities in this is overwhelming, since we are responsible for 5 institutions, including Gambia Police Force, Gambia Immigration Department, Gambia Prison Services, Gambia Fire and Rescue Services, Drug Law Enforcement Agency, the Gambia, Gambia Commission for Refugees. All these are security institutions which have their constitutional mandates, roles, and responsibilities as regards reform imperatives from or directed by the National Security Policy, National Security Strategy, and Security Sector Reform Strategies. And these are key cardinal documents or national documents that must be implemented by Minister of Interior to be able to gain our pace with reform in the security sector area. And that is virtually moving forward. Since those, the NSP, which is the main overarching policy, has been implemented or has been launched and is on implementation. It's launched in 2019. The two strategies were developed in 2020. So the Ministry of Interior is going by these policy directives to ensure the reform happens to the core of its objectives by the government. We have partners supporting the ministry in this area, which is UNDP. We have other partners, DCAF, Geneva Institute, Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance. They are doing a lot in the reform activities of the Ministry of Interior. UNDP has helped or supported the ministry to develop Gambia Police Force Institutional Policy and Gambia Immigration Institutional Policy. DCAF has started and still going with development of operational policies of those institutions. There are SOPs, that is standard operating procedures, for example, in public order management, in investigation procedures, among others. There are a lot. I cannot mention all of them here. Why we are starting with policies? Policies guided our programs and activities. They guided our actions and attitudes. Without policies, we are nowhere. In fact, this is what causes illegitimate ruling, irresponsible administrations, irresponsible managements here and there, because policies are not there. And when you look at SSR, it has these key fundamental processes: assessment, review or development of policies, implementation, and then monitoring and coordination of programs and activities. These are core areas of SSR processes. So, ministry is gaining its support both within the civil society and the international level, international partners. A lot of our responsibilities or the mandates of SSR has been highlighted by previous speakers. How police should be responsible in implementing law and order. How the ministry should respond to international standards by enacting or ratifying and enacting regional protocols, conventions, and treaties, like ECOWAS, AU, that has been mentioned by a man from NHRC. How they should comport themselves to the standards of those conventions in terms of operating, in terms of delivering public security services, proportionality in the use of force has been highlighted by. Most of all these things is interior responsibility as an oversight institution to ensure they are delivered according to those respective protocols or treaties. This is why we are undertaking that robust reform in the policy areas, because without those policies, without those regulations, it would be difficult for Ministry of Interior security sector to deliver to the core of those mandates. So we are doing a lot in that area after allowing partners to support, partners to direct our visions and missions towards achieving that area. It is unfortunate that I was informed of this meeting today. I would have conceived a lot of those policy areas or frameworks that we have developed with the intervention of those partners to ensure we respond to the mandate of security sector reform undertaken by government of the Gambia. But notwithstanding, some of them are here, those partners are here. Maybe with extent of time, they might speak around those areas if times allow us. So virtually, this is what I can say in terms of reform. And we know the TRR recommendation or the government white paper will be implemented, because that is nobody's own paper, it is our collective paper. The reform is not for Jiba, neither Samate. It is for the Gambians. If I escape brutality, my family, my relative may not in near future. So, as government institution, we are all responsible to respond to the security sector reform agenda. This is for the future of our posterity. Is for the Gambia to support and enhance peace-building mandates of the global community. Security is a fundamental human right issue. If people are not secured, peace cannot reign, development cannot happen. So as a security institution, we know where our roles are, where our constitutional mandates are. This is why we are very responsible and we are very prepared to ensure whatever is people's security, is public security and safety is executed to the core. So for that being the case, I would like to end my speak here, and thank you very much for that wonderful time.
To ensure democratic dispensation, to ensure people come out to speak out, to ensure people participate in public affairs, it's good these rights are guaranteed. And of course, we have them guaranteed in our laws, in our constitution, which is a very good thing. However, police should also have a say in this, and the police would respond to this, because in accordance with our laws, the police is given the mandate to police assemblies. And where we're looking at where we're coming from, 22 years down the line, from 94 to 2017, a lot had happened. We had seen the way the police and other security institution has been used by our former president to control and, suppress the population. So the mindset remains. It will take time to delete this mindset and to ensure they operate in accordance with democratic values. This would take time, but of course, it's work in progress. And together we can make this thing happen, surely. I just want to first highlight two scenarios. If right now somebody calls the police and report a robbery incident at your door or in your compound when you are locked inside, within minutes they would respond and they would do the extra mile to ensure these people are arrested, and taken before the courts, which for me is a way of protecting the rights of that individual to property and other rights that might be affected if the robbery happens. But on the other hand, if somebody comes before the police and say, I want to demonstrate, I want to protest, because I feel this particular situation is happening and I'm not comfortable with it, it's affecting me, and the state should do something, then the police would frown to this, which is also the protection of a particular right. So what I'm just trying to say here is the mindset when it comes to issues of assemblies, demonstration, and freedom of speech is that these things aren't supposed to be happening. They are seen probably as offenses, I would say, by the state security institutions. Or probably they have been used by the state to control the people not to speak out. Either or is something that needs to be addressed, and we need to talk about this. It could be an issue of capacity. That is, maybe they don't know, but it could also be an issue of authoritarian rule, as we have seen in the previous years between 94 to 2017. Like somebody said earlier, one of the speakers, these people themselves are victims because they have been used to perpetrate serious human rights violations. And this would, of course, affect the people that are committing these violations themselves. I come from a policing background. I have been in the police and I have been training police officers. So I know a lot where the lapses are when it comes to public order management. And the previous speakers had spoken a lot about that, ranging from the recruitment, selection, and promotion issues, how people were being recruited, and all those things contribute, because I was in the center of all this, training people that are brought in. And you can see how difficult it is when the wrong people are brought for you to train. Certain people, you look at them and feel they are untrainable no matter what you do. So which goes down to say that they came in using the wrong way. If they had gone through the procedures, generally, if you want to discuss issues of increasing capacity, normally there's a need for capacity needs assessment, or you may call it training needs assessment, to know where the capacity gaps are so that you will discuss on increasing the capacity on certain areas. However, in our situation, you don't really need to do that to be able to realize the capacity gaps when it comes to public order management by the police in the Gambia. Recalling some of the incidents that happened, April 10, we have seen what happened. We were all witnesses to this. I remember April 10, I was still going to school and I was in grade 10. So I was part of the demonstration and I've seen how it happened. Also, of course, April 14, the incident we are commemorating here, calling on a reform of our electoral laws, which I believe is something that we would have all wanted to do. So when somebody had volunteered and took the sacrifice to do it, that was a good thing. So we had seen what happened there, and it resulted to the loss of life. We can also recall the Faraba Banta incident, where youths of a particular village came out to demonstrate and protest on some harmful effects of the mining to their environment. We can remember the April 3 years Jotna, which is, of course, just very recent. We can also remember the demonstration against the anti-crime. And on the same day, there was also another demonstration in Birkama happening the same day. On the death of one Usman Dabo of the Serekunda market. We can remember the Sanyang incident, where the youths of the village came out to protest and burn down the Sanyang police station, and of course the fish mill factory that is situated in Sanyang. And we had seen how things had unfolded. But we had also seen the recent incident that happened in Birikama, where somebody was brutally and mercilessly beaten by members of the Gambia Police Force, PIU to be specific. All these things are instances that you can use as a yardstick to conclude that there are capacity gaps when it comes to policing public assemblies in the Gambia. But also, other issues that we can use are our complaint management, our complaint mechanism as NHRC, some of the complaints we received, like our chair earlier alluded to, but also revelations during the TRRC. We have had the revelations and some of the things that you never could think that is happening in the Gambia were happening and were perpetrated by our own people. And looking at the recommendations from the TRRC, of course, they had gone through a process, investigated, know what the root causes are, and made their recommendations on some of this. And one of those recommendations, like the previous speaker, Mr. Ta, stated, is training for security forces. So these are things we look at and come to the conclusion that there are capacity gaps. And of course, where there are capacity gaps, you need to devise ways of increasing the capacity in those areas. And in the specific area we are talking about here is in the area of public order management, crowd control. I just want to talk about few other success stories, probably, which could make us think on how better we can do things. We remember the victim center demonstration. Victim center, there was this demonstration by the victim center when certain people in the country started calling for the return of the former president. So this demonstration I had gone to monitor, and I was impressed with the way it happened. It happened smoothly and everything went fine. So which means we can do things better. We just need to address some issues and things would be better. There was this attack at Serekunda police station. A mob came out and they attacked Serekunda police station. And the police struggled to handle this, but a certain Honorable Halifa Saleh came out and was able to move the crowd and disperse them alone. So this clicks, why are the police also not using some of these influential people to help when it comes to crowd? There are people that everybody listens to, and they can just come and all these things are provided for in the guideline for policing public assemblies that our chairman referred to when he was making his speech. So we also remember the Operation 3 Years Jotna, the initial demonstration, the first one. The crowd was too much, but it was done peacefully. The good practice to pick from this was, during that period, the police that was in charge operations at the headquarters, I remembered, had several meetings and communications with the 3 Years Jotna executive before this. So a lot of things were put in place, and for me, we give credit to those discussions, those meetings, and those communications. That was why that first one went on successfully without violence. Unfortunately, the second one was something we could not brag about, yeah? So, looking at this, we would start thinking, why are we having these repeated issues of police brutality? Why are we having heavy-handedness by the police when it comes to public order management? Why is there excessive use of force by the police when there is public order management every time? Okay, in majority of instances. One, you could look at it as the wrong mindset, like what I tried to illustrate at the beginning. The mindset is this person coming to demonstrate against the government. What is it saying? Why do you stand up and say anything against the government? Who are you to say anything against the government? You can also attribute it to poor capacity. I mean, insufficient training on public order management for law enforcement officers. If there was proper and sufficient training, probably some of these things would not have happened. In the case of Faraba and on previous incidents of public order where excessive force was used, you could attribute it to the lack of sufficient equipments. This could be also attributed. And of course, issues of police accountability was a big problem. In those days, you cannot come out and say anything against the government. The police would use force and nothing would come out of it. We have seen investigations that were stopped or jeopardized just because it has, okay, the police or whoever had done what he had done had the backing of the government or the president at the time. So nothing would come out of it at the end of the day. So there was no accountability and they can do anything and go scot-free. So this could also be factors that contributed to what we are looking at today. So looking at all this, what do you think is what is needed now? I have here, we need to review the police training curriculum. We really need to go back and look at what the police training curriculum has and how are they conducting their training programs, especially on the aspects of public order. Something is also needed to increase the capacity of the police, and that is we review their recruitment, selection, and promotion policies. This is important because this determines the type of people and the caliber of people that are coming into the police. And we look at public order as something that you just need energy to move people around, but no, it needs a lot of sound judgment to be able to make the right decisions when it comes to public order management. So anybody that is recruited into the police force should be that level so that they can determine what level of force should I use at this or what technique do I use right now to ensure this situation is sorted out. We need to develop POM policies. I would just say, Chair had referred to the code of conduct that we had helped the police develop. But apart from this code of conduct, we also had helped them develop the guideline on policing assemblies in the Gambia. And our inspiration, we draw inspiration from the guideline on policing assemblies in Africa. It's human rights friendly, it's a very good one. What we should advocate for now and push for now is for them to start implementing this guideline. And maybe to prepare SOPs in accordance with this guideline, and we will call this thing to rest. But one document, that is my opinion, that I feel is derailing the efforts is the Public Order Act. Looking at it, it has been here since 1961. So we know it's obsolete, it's archaic. So we should put it aside and have a new one that is addressing our current realities and not using that one, which I believe was used by other people just to suppress and colonize us. So we have a lot of opportunities in this, and that is one, there's already an existing guideline on policing assemblies. I know for certain that there's the available human resource capacity to train officers of the Gambia Police Force on public order management techniques. I mean, at the tactical level, on how to move around and the drills. I know for certain that there is that human resource capacity. Within the police, it's not very far, just within the police, it's existing. But I also know that there is the NHRC and other institutions that could come together and build the capacity of the Gambia Police Force, especially in the field of public order management. Because right now in the Gambia, with the current state of affairs, we'll be seeing a lot of protests and demonstrations. That is democracy. We need to embrace this. So, hence this is democracy, hence this is what we yearn for, and we have it now. So we should build the capacity of the institutions of the Gambia to be able to also facilitate this. so that we can have a peaceful country. Yeah. So the other things I had here were just some of the provisions that are in the guideline on the policing assemblies, which if we train the police on, we would really be increasing their capacity when it comes to policing public assemblies.
Birinata ayatara ko mbi kontong la fam enata fonye ko tulmang lo dal me hawjer ne mbita ko be simela nga kontong gulan tate wale inata fonye ko sama nga programme mo so minketa interparty meeting ngo albe ko ngol fo ni angale kan ngol li karamu li non buga la ka dum bankara sain e ko nyako mbita min tole ko mbita la folo la bureau to manjay nimbota manjay don mbita lola silo le kandron mimbe mbulu ngafo ko munde bale bulu ko wolom nyindi IC ala time o bantale dum ma sekunda ba dering ima falin lafta nga ya falin se carte fa yo tilin ngo soto anin Senegal ni Gambia bodo mi ya sorong mbite dani la police bodo yele ba wolo mun to la problème o ten to la domorol fengol bi ka bonani Senegal ngo de o manke fenti hani ngale tero sa fengo ki ngamre nyanto jabi la ngadi na IC la minketa Suleiman Diouf ngamar sar habar mbengata isalon ko nyimmu Gambie be la sulol kono problème te fango yisilo to bi kata banjun ko sumba may diabetes to anin high blood so fongo ta wala buro nyini nyanta nyin lay ko Westfield pharmacie nimma be soto yedo mbitala banjun pharmacie ngata nyini ji ko askeno nga benje ko al ko mbitala banjun janale Westfield so nimbo te yedo tebe fulol ji la pharmacie nol ntata bureau to bi nga moltare bi ipate ji kan nangi ko mitino kala katu metal batul ngo ha umto nyal ngo sani nga fatiyata katu misil mo be fen kala don ka fulol ka ala tan dal nyaato ma fatiyata don jita bidin jita nata bulan moto kono modul bulata je mo jamal bi jamini ko bitani singol la modul tata ni singol la nata ta fon futata Westfield pharmacie don ko alin te batunga aljindi jang bawo janam ñi jon soto mulbe dame ko han ko baltara je nga mbamal boro ñini folo nga ñini nga dekal finance soto nga hydromet nga boro si fa fula soto bal bendro mo soto say kayto safe otumo bendro ñi manketale e kayto safe ya na loptano to je e pharmacie to je ko ñita bañun pharmacie ibadi la mola je ñi min to bi jang ya di ala be bendro ñi wa flema nata nan ko say batunga na mitino ñi aten jang ibe min fola ba ngala manta time tal aftan se continue ngata ñi boro ñi sanna na risito be mbulo kono ani na kodo be mbulo kono nata ta fo je mu fota nga moltare be bendinji mfana mbelo ta je ko mala ye ko mala moto pa mala sadio wulo kata drive uti kay moto pa ngi aten ni porte do nga continue ngata banjo yemin fonte mandi ka kangoto ko lafta pour IC change moko angale kango fono comme mini akarambare ye wala fo angale kangoto ha sai wo fulol dron fo jarata pour kam momu takata liba nyinda ma nyinefo mole nyindo benga ndase udam malakal sai mbije sojer sababe loring o dio kabordami akoma sojer sababe loring je eni la info bar kittebul fentebul e ko nyako muso system konnam ite ka pati jamal sabot kay fo len siya halu wo fan fo am I no right to support any other party ako nyako haka you have fine na so ngola ke ika nyin ka wala minute ako awa tabula yi moto kon ko what do you mean tabula yi moto kon fo ni mimbe UDP parti wol nyanta bula yi moto kon ako hay mo nyol bi jela no dole be tala jela balore noto madam ko kata nganda bala ko sane nata wo mu police fo superintendent lo fo menom ko sana la buton ni jamal kabir nganata ako itelum nyin ko beti bawo nganyim fo solo nyolel pour nyin so ko cancel nkay mu no ko be keri woto ni wole ma fo nyete na fo nyiba katun te mala be keri aljanjang nkay moli la pamito da commune ko bi da ke be ta mol janjang no nkana mi fo yolon hani on ta te ya bon talo rin dala akoke atata paral ngaji ni boro kana ani moto kana atata te botan ko to fa seita fa tata lo dula to malo be kol paral ni moto na tan jahal tan ngamra ko fendobe ko man ko auto batun tan se ko ka to paral ni boro min kana se keno fendol keta yara fe kanam fanglo wala kabiri nata don ilota ibe mol bayle be timpala be fayla moto kono ibe mol solo i mate moto o loto je because atebulata moto kono la te bortale min bente dala lori wole solo dula foye itata kamonan inata aya tara indrubal ne moto kono sama piayo me sirim piayo ko ngasi du man tangi dali jonko ngol tata jonko to natan sita fatu moto be kumbola fatu kamaro ngo alide mbe mu nyimban ko dingol ti mimbe kela mbaje la mimbe fola mbamoy la ay mbe ngande ngal lamoy e koy koy la ke bale batu ko ke bam nyamate koy la ministre kamba ndona ta paral mo fora ko nyako mero ko na akonya ali fanyu di amol don sa ina ke bal kanana nana ta be di amol don ay se nyimman ke problem ti maybe ya fa nyame wolo na mbisirin ko bisimilla biye ngaje moto tiyo nata lota biri moto tiyo lota ke o jita ji anala informul butongol kanol dawda balo be ni butong kabri nga foto yakko why are those people anyine follow nte kay ko wole to mu jamaati alla minister to mu jamaati akonya Usman Sonko kay okay kawul tan kay wulinda ta tita lokol katu janni kala hajotinya mbiye do ngaji kabri saluta nyi aba fala why are be o diamol fola ngalo ngate jibeten ay jibin kay ken a ko jiji ngalo ko nyino so panasir is this woman among them sane kay ko is a leader and solo sane and nyin e wolle fo je nyin ko me do len sirin ko majen falan Sonko kon tolum leader ti kay wallahi am not a leader muna ne be introduce lawo jam foi te entero na katunte metalo sanyen inata iko ngabulam yembe wulindi iko ngata na talo bana samana bana mi yana bana ko tol famu dai nata mi fena iko ngawuli nga amutan teni modungom pour yenna natal ko min be safel nga bala ma lon ten nata natal kata tul wulo do normalti ni ngan natal ni fi ale ku jo ka je sa fo no ko fangole yaf ak ala fo nyala karangalo membi je inata karang okay wo fana man ke fenti ngabodu ngom ya mutan tan ngamutal lota yen natal yembul fululta ya city ya hankof kon tabula moto kon e modu ngom fana hankof kay tabula moto kon anen karamundo dini school boys fula ntene wala tata nyol paral sita ten dol sita ten te yesa atra min ko where are those people ako okay dinalen tiglesin okay ha ngata ay sen tiglesin ala fana sen tiglesin embulani moto la wala nyama yesam biden taran tan amran kata mile tule ntata fon tambita mile 2 dala ko ha intol kata mile 2 malo kata dan auto mon tel malo ena e fon be dami ma fon ni banko kam yen samba fo i kofta bunda dole ngamoy bimbe sirin dala se Omar Jeng aba fala ko open the gate we are to come in so kabirin kata don yalon angale kan unta fo no ko karanalo bar gambia de ngone dol fo be lu fa xam le kamen fo e bunda ngatare bunda yele natal moto kofta solo sanana moto be nyaato nte bano kan ndunta konoto e bunda so ron ko take mo man dulaji ko take fo tulumbe konoto berim fotata yen jindi e solo tambindi tata sama rumdo ko e konte na jam nde dun taji ko ngombulul tamp ten nga be tamp yembalo wiste ko fu safol be mbala ni fen yembalo wiste safu kili yo tara mbala wo safo kabrin sunguto ndimba ma okay mbalo be mbala ko mesa fo sile mena kamene be ken fo mbita safo sile e ko nyami be keri malo ko hani e ko ke balo non ko bismillah mbe siri lori ngi tol gundo je ke ba dona ta nalta sabay jang ke ba jangolom ten e ko nyoko topal ki bula nyi nom bula ta ke ba no kan ntata pour ka sel step do kan na ko nyoko mbata ka nga jeli kay way ite ke baba ite en muso nyen kala wala do dem tak la sa jabar mbula to wala nyam nata to bun kon musu kilin tar sirinje o fanan office do kula lam na kay problème so to ya mabo je la mul maje atela ma sir ngade tar sirinje nga konton wo foy meta janga ko ha mine kete la kabri na ya ko nya ma ke fen ken ma fe fonye folo mbe sirinje wala nya man kay wati je ke ja ko yimbe ngalo ko fula jangala ko jang eni mo man tar ka cala janga ko hay dam ma ko ha ko alamuta ko ya moy la ko han kay be ngan tunduno di alale man sa talla min ka jongo fasa nata fintina nata ke banda fintina hen sammadula do to bahamal biji kofta bahamal lan kofta ten ay sammadula do ay sindiji office olum je fanata commune table beten pour ka interview yanyi nen kan ko man fellonje ngam fanje jenero bar mi be keri malo e kon tele kon kata inda party meeting la adu sign altol ali mi ne kacha jennal kanan kay ngam min kacha ko han ko mon fen kacha foni nal tol ya kacha jenna bari ni mo non fen kacha do nata ko nyako yen degen deger fit degen nani kani wa ñu ñolen gena nani kani mon ko getal ke balaba ay hafta dun ko wayango dun ko min dun ko be mbala nyami atata ke ko yolom atata ameta anata mun nan kan waxo fi dara ñu ko ben bobu rek la mo wax da ngay wax so waxul fi da ngeen xamne ñun ñolen gena nani kani togal da ngeen gis man ko yow sama soxo bi kay mo yow do gambien yow lo si do xam nga lan la sori ma bi problème gambia du gambia Sénégal sori ma demal wa ok dina ñew adam na ko rek ko kay wuyu wulta ko tege ke ba kilo mi yambo nan o bun kono kana samma reception to kana o ke ba kilo nalta sabo be nyaata ko tege ay sambay tatan soron e bundo yele iko nga dunje ndun taji bundo yele ko nga dunje bun saba ya belo wa bare alfa ay nte soro jango hal criminal be ka soron ten bun ciabu saba mbe sirinje just 5 and 10 minutes mo sifam ina tana iko nyako barke ba fulo min nga itaye nimbe fintila wala ke ko dite ye nyaabi ti ngalo mollo min yello ngi mala fi ngi suute ma wala suute yen fintindi nan iko nyako topal xale bi kam mano len tamba wato kamban dingo kamban men dingo lam dal ay sama fo ngutata bunjango ko na sodo ten dulabi je wo commune place malum ten benim fotata yedo ngomol tar ye beni masko fotata mina do ngoy koybe faano kala nyaato mansom so ni tata wo nyama pusan pul butu kan dungu kur peño lam beño fadel ni tanitol because soto mon defana ba kata kan kam fan kanandi e dol ba kata kan pour kam muté mamutano so ni tata wala me wul me ala to komanda don ba mo moyi je ngami suté tata wala nya la bangola do be ko ma julo fay wo julo bulata kangola nga julo wari dentan singola duma yew bo fudo musandi ta wala nyama nyepitan kan do len kan muta ya ngaji te nyabe santo jubela do len bulol muta do len tema muta do len sun muta so yen samba silande ngo silo be jete fu babala yen samba je yen sindi botu badi amado be ala dalna ke ba do nata sutuma ko nyako hanise wuru jang mo be ke wuru kan moy jang kay bal ala ka moy ko nyayo si abata ina be ni ma ko la go wallahi bina ma ko la bari je tata ngaji ñing miru ñepitan kan fu kam busandi wo mo kilangal lom because kabiri ñepite kan ngela de masko wa fu ñaato ngay ñaadal jela ngalo wolum ñamata wolum tamba man sarenti anin fenke susool kata something like because ida malka nyoto kumande nyoto kumande ko tol mutale mbeka nyina wol ko ngawuli nga oton tebe ta kan solo be damen to ngajeji be solo nyin ka kan iba ankes kan solo nyin adiyama to don haruna su solo folo bota je ata solo tulo busa pawa kay da soron malon haruna su so ne solo Sangdeng solo ya no bake bar bawi kafu jamalum ntol mo flo damal be te ibulu wato oto mo nyin doni wol soron ni kaso kono e mo wol fintini ina tan sambaje ye wulinde duma ko ya so lebi jembe sirin duma ina tan wulinde yen samba dula to mi yalan ko adula ni open place lam e tabulol ta ye landi sun musol musu saba fanani wolbe sirin sirin ka wol din so be buri ba mele sun ko tollo bari be do ko la jela ngalo e peni la busol ila tamama sanin folo ko ila ngane ile se ko fenko jabo ngane sen ko jabo nka ente manke jabati balum jaboti e ko fonte nka e foyte minati to mon sel malo ko halama dingol mo do ba sen halama dingol i balum jaboti wala ngi yasarenka akoy studied ñing mo groupe le ñi dulal be faale so comme ningal la dol be mbulo muta dol yen sen muta man sol lal o fanan keta keloti mu warta bakente ni tultem foye mbusande ni tableau be busanda so tableau ñing ala kuliya man ñin si kabiri be woli paro ngo tableau ta ngaya fay kan ning tableau be fay kan be busandita wulta ko nga kelo mamande ni tol kalli pale kende ke ni la busol nga minna buso ñi mutado nga sey ndila ni nga do ta muta nga fay kan 40 santo ni tata wallahi sita fo min tol ni be kele kan ko kola min be contrôle je dul ba fal 1 2 3 dul ba fal 1 2 3 dul ba fala e kon sikka ba sifeji yalla wol be man ken tolla kamalti yo inata fa ko excuse be la bu sol ni tenkundi e be lolen so solo fenke aduna suso o kola bente o lipo kambiri ko excuse do nata solo je ya fintindi na ya janni jammuta inata fe yalandi e kayela ko solo mune atinne be sonne la kabiri bungo ko non ko kana son mo kana wura el kana son persay ni mo kilingo mo tan saba mo tan nan be lote ko e nyinke foyake mo kala fe kala ko mo le sen kan adingol bi jang al se hekatu baki o wato le nata nyapiya kan kay solo tumo nga busan ko la ñin no biya ko nya babu to ñi man kay babu to akoyte bi be fa bu ko le be bu ke dula don kay babu ke dula be wol ko don kabiri be na tan yapin kan do kabiri yen ñori wo ñama do yalla sama to son ko ta han bi wolé na jang problème ay cik na yento don ci borkastan ko to don yewu ba fu mbusandita ko soto mon sembo kuliyata bak so nata busandi ila yin be para samata bata ya lon sin fulol be kan sin ko katitam fanga ya moya be kumala ni sin ko ndem do nata yimbulu akunyin yin sembo fo jinolom fo buwalom ba malom beleli tamba nata ko nyako ite mo no sifat ibata mon tolen ko mota magere ite to don ko no bay nyaay ite mo no sifa fo ite mo jino defo mo buwadi kay ni mo libeti tanu ngefa ebe jama fa ni mi trata bi te khani su hana ka te su na isi ma koy ka ko ala se mo wata tati kay te mu jankadi molti mangi halal dindi ni wonte mo killing o tatina ali bula mo la ka mo be tilimbaliya mo killing o tatina ali mo ke mo kun killing mo ya jamati wala so banda ali parote ni ka nyimbe ka jawol wa yel tonin ñun li pa somanda solo sande wuli yen samba e mo be killing ba wi ko te yemu to ko te yen tul yemu sabul samba tata mbula bun killing kono ko te sa solo na je ko te palentere do ban din e kawla ji jebe faari je sumunale be lori woto bawo kamino soro je ke sumune fanna jele say mbe siri woto solo ko nyako kabina ta fe ya atella bang ta tel fel na ya nyurdin tol kam bun ko kay tasi wojje ko wulta wol nyama ngamu tan nyimbul ko ko to woni do beyti bawo nyankatil wala nyant ngamu tan nyindo na ngasa bana kay nasin daraja loko kay tasi ka fo james ningi ya samana ka fo nyetel ka fa kana si jang kay ha ite fanga ne juusi ndi solo na sindala na fani mun mbal santo nga bon nga fene kay ni la nyakat ali la jam ka fu baye wolu ni wol bebe je ali modou diaba nga modou ngom ko ya be ne la jam so nyimbul kilo mbe balul masaji la ko ngal la je le fo duntul ko mata wato min ina tan kilin ko man solo Sangdeng otu mo sino ya ta fam ako nya baraka le masaji be deta mbalo ko ba ko nya ban ko yimin kila jaw yata il faut ñi fana yela ko sino te altul yela do inata kumandu nga wulta wol nyama pikit allota ko ñene ko botum ida de ya fo pa o sene ko nadi mbaal baal kay kana ñim fo solo kana ñim control ya moy man la fi ka moy tulol kana so yura la kela muy mu kelti ni eli pe lipa ibalo ye dimi fana balo be dimi lal nal meta pusan tul la control na sita ibe komandiro kele saji yebula yete fo jaar par kana mu to ko ñi halinde fata betet bam koy kana nka ndo man na jam fa kamale ni ba kele fo dalasi yemi no ya penga meno nga yesalo sammi Sangdeng samba ntulo bala be wurula wulto nyama tel dimbe pare kantare ngalan ko ni solo bo rebinante kamal inata ko to kay dayle kari bunda ke ngamal karnadi woro fo woro la biye ke bunda ile bayle no koy jaay no koy na besiri ne danko okay itali amol ke itali batu yang kay get out fombe wulal ke 5 ngana na do ko bilare madu ngana ibal ke son nan kay take ngana do ko bedo ite kabiri so mande ibal ko mo jare mol wul ngana do ko bedo ndata finti e koy ben nyaasi de mo fada bo do kay nyin funtu no stir mi ko kenta nyaar ma so ye nyaasi wana nga femfe ye minke mo la nga beje because ma so ye nyaasi yang escortu la ko hawto batuna le ko to jang ka ni wonte ba fante man na do ko kan kay ba fulo ngo nyaasi to lu mi del do ko di jang ko ha ala ma ye ba ni fa be nyaasi ila hormo dindi mer man mi ite sete bento ala ma wuli ko ba nata birum foto je bina akoy nata jabole fe na woto mo la ka fa ko jabadi mba fele ila ngani serenka
I cannot say better than Auntie Nogoy has already described it. It is indeed, disheartening. It is very shameful that the security who we should be going to, who we should be trusting, who, should fight for our rights, in turn, brutalize us and, scare us. This lady here, for example, should not have been struggling to go down or up the steps. Just right now, a minute ago, Mohammed's mom said she can remember how fit she was. She was a woman who would, be going up and down. She's very healthy. But because of her violations, her experience, she has to come to this. I would like to say I am sorry that a lot of victims today have also been subject to this and, have had effects similar to hers. A woman who has not done anything, held against her will, tortured, brutalized, like many other women who have been subject to similar things. A lot of them, a high number of women who I have worked with experience rape as well from the security sectors. So from TRRC narrations, we are aware that a number of experiences or, narrations involve torture, mostly by security service personnel. Some of the incidents, Mr. Njai from National Human Rights Commission mentioned, examples like the April 10th, 11, 2000, of course, the 14th April 2016 with the Solo Sangdeng and Co. and recently the Faraba incident, 3 years Jotna, and many others. Through my work at the TRRC, to start off with, before I went to Fantanka, we have worked with perpetrators of violence. We have also worked with victims of violence. Some of the perpetrators who basically narrated the reason why they did what they did was, I don't know how to even explain it, but sometimes you just feel like it should not have happened. You should not even have been in the position to do it. So some of them see themselves as victims. But no matter what happens, it's like the government failed us, the ministry failed us, people who are supposed to be protecting us, like I said, failed us. Victims, they have been subject to beating, kicking, like heinous crimes have been committed. Even babies have been killed. Babies have been in prison, we know about that. People who have not done anything. So some of these effects, like we have seen here, is you're talking about it, you cannot even contain yourself. The mere fact that it is coming back again, it is re-traumatizing you, but not just you. It is re-traumatizing your family, your friends, and the nation as well. Whenever we talk about or listen to victims at the TRRC, it's like, like the nation comes to a standstill. Everybody is crying. Just right now, even when I'm providing support, sometimes I have to contain my emotions, but it is terrible, to be listening to these kind of things. The vicarious trauma you may be encountering as well, that in itself, its effect is unmeasurable. So you can imagine the victim who went through the beatings, the kickings, the killings, their family. Some of the women who have been through these violations, like I said, they've been raped. They have been sexually tortured, and some of the men as well, they have been electrocuted. This affects their sexual and reproductive health. It affects their ability to reproduce, to have babies. How can somebody bring themselves to do that to somebody, affecting their future? You would be in a position to be able to give birth, to be able to reproduce, but they're denying you that fact. That is, of course, if you make it to, if you live. A lot of them died, So people, I will keep taking Auntie Noga as an example. Before she walks properly to go to certain places, she has to go on she has to use a stake. They have disabled a number of people. It's like you're taking their future away from them, their children's future. We all want to be going out with our parents, hugging, going to places, seeing things, having good memories, but you're denying them that. You're denying them their future. You're denying them, time to spend with their grandchildren. Look at baby Solo. If it wasn't police brutality, he would have been here to be able to look after his grandchild, to be bonding with him. But his life was taken, and it should not have happened. The other thing that could happen is like an intergenerational kind of trauma that victims, would be encountering. These are trauma that, pass on generations. It happens to, my dad. It happens to my granddad. It is something that can go down generations because, these are some of the genes that would kind of, be in people's system that fight against some of the trauma. They have different ways of fighting. The flight and the freeze and, what have you, ways of dealing with trauma. Some people would, do it like fight because they're in fear. Fear in itself, it's just like, disguising a way of, fighting. It's sort of fight, you disguise a way of saying that I am fearful. What happens with people in with this police brutality thing, they would respond based on what the police is giving them. Now imagine the police and other security officers going out on a protest, fully armed, protecting themselves, and then attacking people who are innocent, people who, who have not done anything. You know, my problem is a lot of the times I see it as, you know, them taking things personal. When people have things to address with the state, it has nothing to do with you. You know, do not take your work and personalize it. They are talking to the state. If you dare to calm situations down, you should have enough training to make sure that you are able to address some of the issues without using force. Nobody should be put under these kind of issues. Because, you know, like I said, this intergenerational intergenerational trauma, for example, you know, some people would kind of dissociate from, you know, a lot of a lot of people who should be protecting them. They have trust issues. They don't even want to be there bonding with people who love them. You know, you see everybody as, you know, a problem, you know, and you try to groom your children like that. You try to, you know, make, you know, your offsprings, you know, be careful of society. So, you know, it affects our social construct. It affects, you know, the way we are able to relate with each other. These are some of the issues that we should basically, or the police should look into before they start responding to people cruelly, I would say. So one of the things that, you know, I have heard from the victims, a lot of the victims would say to me, you know, I went there, but I did not do anything. Like you said, I did not do anything, but they took me. They didn't even know why you were there. How well trained are you to understand that people should not just be picked up and, you know, tortured? Do we understand our laws? The police who are entrusted with this, do they understand the laws? If they do, then there is a big question mark, you know, and a lot of things need to be addressed. The police as well, do they understand trauma-informed case management? Because if they are picking people, if they are dealing with people, do they understand that, you know, these people that we are arresting, or these people we are supposed to be helping, you know, what kind of grievance do they have? What kind of trauma do they have at the moment? You know, it is about time when we are talking about security sector reform, we try and find the gaps. The gaps include trauma-informed care, trauma-informed, you know, case management, which I have, you know, a big question mark if the police is doing it. Just on Monday, we were in Brikama commemorating April 10th and 11th, 2000. How long are we going to be commemorating these kind of things? You know, until when? When would it stop? In that incident, 12 people died, including 2 toddlers, you know, and, you know, a girl was raped. Of course, Ibrahim Abari was killed, and concurrently, a girl raped. So the police, I don't see what kind of boundaries they have, who they should focus their anger towards. Actually, they should not get their anger towards anybody. But, you know, like raping women, why would you rape somebody as a form of torture? You know, that is a big question. I still don't understand. Why would you beat people? What kind of anger do you have to be there beating people, kicking people like nobody's business? You know, it affects them. It embarrasses them because they have children who don't even want to go talking about their violations. You know, children who would wish that they had their fathers with them. I am sorry, but, you know, in as much as they are trying to contain themselves, the Sangdeng children are also, you know, emotional today. I have worked with victims of, children of victims who really, you know, are missing their parents, who they wish their parents are here. You know, they're angry with the government as well. It's justified. You know, these are things that would happen, and when they are dealing with other people, they have trust issues, and then people start blaming them. You know, until when? Until when? We have black market boys, for example, beach boys who are beaten every day. You know, because of, you know, misunderstandings that, for example, they have phones that do not belong to them. You know, I work with black market boys. They would say the police would go to the black market and take their stuff. because they don't understand the law, they will say to them that, these things are not supposed to be in your possession. It is because of this that we're going to take you to the police station. Recently, a black market person died because of this whole brutality, police brutality as well. Until when? That keeps on being my question. So we need to also understand that trauma, it affects people differently. Because, somebody sits down here and they cry, or somebody sits down here and, give you a straight face, does not mean that the person with a straight face is not dealing with it horribly. We all have our own way of dealing things. It is important that, like I said, the police be trained properly. And also let them not take issues personally. It is not their problem. When people have issues with the government, leave them to deal with it. Like Mr. Njai said, we would have many more. Today, we have seen what happened. There will be many more protests. It's about time the police and the Interior Ministry check a lot of things that is happening to be able to help people live cordially and peacefully in the country. Thank you.
To express our sentiments to all victims of human rights violations in the Gambia, and to assure you that you are not on your own. Civil society in the Gambia stands with you through all these trying times. I'm supposed to be talking on the role of civil society in security sector reform. These days I have become a rebel, so I don't always stick to the script given to me, because I think apart from script, we need to also talk to each other seriously as Gambians if we are going to regulate the things that are happening in our country. So let me begin by addressing civil society itself. If civil society is to have a meaningful engagement in the security sector reform and in any transitional justice process in the strengthening of our democracy, civil society itself must see itself and take itself more seriously than we do. What we see now is members of civil society disparaging each other, crying down each other when some people are trying to do what they can do, others are lambasting civil society, because it seems as in the Gambia, we like to outsource our deliverables. People want other people to do the heavy lifting for them. So everything is thrown on the shoulders of civil society. Sometimes we ourselves are caught in the crossfire, whilst others are busy carrying the load of our democracy, our transitional justice process. Others are busy crying down and criticizing and condemning every effort that is being made. It is disheartening. And I'm saying this because I am also very soon stepping down from leadership in civil society, so that we also help the new leadership to be able to do what it should do. But being divided is not going to help us. Having civil society members that are partisan, are into so much partisan politics, is not going to help us. If you are in civil society, you must stand on the side of justice and truth at all times. It does not matter who is right. And even if your party is wrong, you must stand on the side of truth. That is what gives civil society credibility. That is what gives civil society a name and a stand, and even the moral authority to be able to move the security sector reforms forward. Sticking on the side of truth. I was so disappointed recently when, during the nominations of Modu Sabali, we saw police brutality at first hand. And obviously, my first thing was to call the IGP. I had a very strong discussion with him. He expressed his concerns, their regret, and even some of the reforms that they had taken, the trainings, having their teams go with cameras so that they could review and all that. But a few days later, or maybe a day after, I also saw the other side, where reckless civilian behavior was happening. And the same civil society people that were condemning police brutality were silent on the reckless behavior of civilians. What kind of a people are we? Civil society, you must speak truth to power and speak truth to yourself. We cannot condemn police brutality and then condone civilian brutality against the police, because they are also humans. So if we condemn brutality, we must condemn it all throughout. And if security sector reform is to happen, we must stand on the side of truth. What are we up against? I have worked over the past 5 years with very sincere civil servants. Men and women in uniform, men and women in authority that want to see change. People that, if it was left to them alone, will do all in their power to change things that are happening. I remember having a series of discussions, and a good number of us, the Human Rights Commission chairman, Salutal of the Bar Association, with the late IGP. And he kept saying, my brother, our hands are tied. We still have the Public Order Act. What are the lawmakers do? What are the lawmakers doing? What are they doing towards the Public Order Act? Can't they repeal it? Because as long as it is there, sometimes it is difficult. Their hands are tied. So what we have and what we contend with is a systemic problem. On one side, you have people willing to change. On the other side, you have a system that is willing to take advantage of what is systemically wrong and what helps them to get them entrenched in power. From yesterday to today, I was telling people that I'm thinking of taking the back way. I'm fed up with Gambia. I'm about to give up. I walked in, sat down there. Auntie Nogoy walked in. Then I said, never in my lifetime am I giving up on this country. For one reason, bad things have happened in this country. But we can come together and fight together. Somebody says civil society. But I also say political parties. What can we do together going forward? Sometimes we call for protest, and the people that are the loudest mouths for protest are nowhere to be found on the ground when you call for protest. Sometimes the political parties also would shout, what is civil society doing? But when we call, how many show up? One time we called for a march. Let's march in solidarity with victims. Let's tell the victims that we are together with them in this march, that they will never be alone, that we understand their pain. How many political parties showed up? But if it was insulting the government and fighting the government, maybe people will come. But we must understand that we as a people, as Gambians, must have one agenda, and that agenda must be to defend the interest of every Gambian, to ensure that no human rights violation happens in this country, no matter what. And it does not matter which political party commits it. We stand for the truth together. And that will be our strength. That would be the strength of civil society and the Gambian people in pushing the reforms forward. Is there any hope? There is, as long as we together are willing to work for change. Does this government that we have the moral authority or the backbone to effect change, taking into consideration that the greatest of perpetrators are aligning themselves or walking around the corridors of power? It's a question we have to ask ourselves. One of the things that government is good at is to use civil society to check their boxes. So civil society, be careful. And I have made up my mind that I am not going to be a carry-on for any government to check their boxes. Yes, we are working with civil society. But you know why they do that? It's because we are not united. Because if I, as a leader in civil society, tell my members that nobody should answer this call from government, some of you hypocritically, for photo ops and Facebook warriorship, you will answer to the invitation. And all the protests that we want to do will be null and void. So I ask myself, what do we want for our country? We see what has happened today in Parliament. People are asking, what is civil society doing? I am tired of writing and saying things that nobody listens to. It enters into one ear and goes out into the other. If I cannot have action that is formidable, that will produce results, I will sit and wait until we all as a country hit our head on the wall and wake up and discover that it's time for us to change. As I close, let me give you an example why I say it's difficult for change to happen. We were in January 2019 engaged in some very intense discussions between 3 years Jotna protesters that we felt as civil society was their right to protest peacefully, and the government security apparatus that felt that they could not allow the protests because of the fear that the protesters wanted to take over the country. In these discussions over the 1 week, my phone was like a hotline. Every day, from top to bottom, heads of security services, ministers were calling. Mr. Yai, please get them to de-escalate. Let it calm down. We talk. We brought everybody together, signed an agreement. I was at the IGP's office until after 2, after 3, trying to get the permits done. We got the permit. They gave the permit for the people to protest. Only for the day of the protest, for things to go wrong. The system kicked in, frustrated the efforts, and unfortunately I was caught in the crossfire, and for the first time in my life, experienced the aggression of tear gas, because people and the system refuse to honor their word. Going forward in this country, tougher times are ahead. But until we Gambians decide that enough is enough, and if I say we Gambians, I mean we Gambians, decide that enough is enough, and take our destiny in our hands, and tell our leaders that they must go by what we want, or we will get rid of them. So I must commend the work that the foundation is doing, civil society organizations that are doing their utmost to push the transitional justice process forward. To my brother in DCAF, they have done a lot. I know a lot is happening. But when it comes to implementation, that's where the question is. Because some of our civil servants, as much as they are willing to change, but sometimes the system will not allow them. But all hope is not lost. I believe that one day this country will rise up. And there is a rising coming. Because Gambians are becoming more aware. Gambians are becoming more resolved that nobody will take advantage of our destiny. So whether we are patient through time to continue chipping a little at that mountain, until one day the mountain comes down. But all hope is not lost, my brothers and sisters in Gambia. We in civil society will continue to push for reforms. But I will call on all of us. Let's stop. You are civil society, you are government, you are this, you are that, you are political party, you are this. Together, if we are resolved enough and work together, we will begin to solve our problems. With this, I salute you all. And I pray for the blessings and the peace of our country. And I've added one thing else to my prayer, and that is, may God judge between us and the people that rule over us. God bless you all.
Islamic microfinance is becoming an increasingly popular mechanism for poverty alleviation, especially for developing countries around the world. This microfinance service adheres to the principles of Islam as a form of social responsibility. Yona Islamic Microfinance is the Islamic microfinance of choice in the Gambia, trustworthy and reliable. At Yona Islamic Microfinance, we provide savings products, current accounts, financing products in conformity with Islam. In addition, Yona Islamic Microfinance also offers local and international remittances, takaful fund, management of zakat, management of awqaf, trading and investment, and building of strategic partnerships to bring financial services to the doorstep of the poor with donor projects, madrasas, youth organizations, women groups, and farmer organizations. Make a choice with Yona Islamic Microfinance today. For more information on Yona Islamic Microfinance, call 377-2151 or 9832-151 or visit Yona head office at Tipa Garage, Bakote, or visit any Yona branch located countrywide near you.